Agenda with Louise Martin.
BBC Radio Leeds.
Good afternoon and welcome to On the Agenda, BBC Radio Leeds politics show, bringing you all you need to know about the political world of West Yorkshire. And today, well, we're wondering if that world should maybe just close in on itself just a little bit. Shut the drawbridge at Cleckheaton and just close those gates in Keighley. This week, the Core City group in the UK, of which Leeds is a part of, got together to call for more powers for the regions. They signed a Magna Carta for the 21st century in Glasgow. I went with them up to Bonnie, Scotland. I travelled just to see what this devolution business is all about. So today, we're looking at whether our region would be better off with more powers and more money for itself. I'm live in the studio with a panel of lovely guests who you'll get to meet in a moment. And our reporter, Peg Alexander, is at Huddersfield University, where they're discussing devolution with their students today.
Well, I'm over at Huddersfield University today. Now, today there's an event where they're talking about decentralisation and the future of Yorkshire. They've had a number of panels starting this morning with the Institute of Public Policy Research, North, some MPs. We're going to be hearing from them a bit later. Now they're talking about whether people feel English or British, as well as maybe Yorkshire. We're going to be finding out more about the things they've been discussing here today throughout the show.
So that's Peg Alexander. You'll hear from some of the city leaders in Glasgow on Monday, as well as the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who says that more money could enhance the lives of people in our towns and cities. And should we be taking some advice from one of the most talked about men in Scotland, the country's Labour leader, Jim Murphy?
Yeah, I think that Scotland's led the devolution debate, and I just asked the people of Yorkshire to catch up. Leeds is a great city, and there are kind of other great cities in Yorkshire, but it's taken Scotland some time to get where we've got to. The lesson I would maybe have for Scotland and offering to Yorkshire is that there's no point in taking power out of London and centralising it in another big city, in the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. So let's not take it out of London and give it to Leeds or Sheffield. It has to be in the communities and towns of Yorkshire, and the way that I want to take power out of London, out of Edinburgh, and put it into Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dumfries, Inverness, and many others besides.
So this is BBC Radio Leeds and On the Agenda. You can let me know about your thoughts on devolution today, whether you think the region should be given more powers. Tweet me at BBC Leeds or text 81333 and start your message with the word Leeds.
On the Agenda with Louise Martin.
BBC Radio Leeds.
But as ever, I'm not in the studio on my own. Luckily, I'm joined by people far smarter than me, so that's nice. So here behind the microphones are the Leeds University academic, Victoria Honeyman, Chris Rowell from Conservative Future, and Chris Glenn from the Federation of Small Businesses here in West Yorkshire. So good afternoon to you all.
Good afternoon.
Well, it's very nice that you can join me on a Friday afternoon. You're not in the pub, which is very nice. So first of all, our city leaders were in Glasgow. I followed them up there. They signed this Magna Carta for the 21st century. I mean, is there really any point to it, Vic? I'll come to you.
Oh, thanks. Start with an easy one. I'm not entirely sure that there is. I think it's all well and good that they're talking about devolution, but realistically, the push for devolution will inevitably come either from the people of Yorkshire or the people of whichever region wants to devolve, and then central government. And signing Magna Cartas is all well and good, and that's terrific and great, but I'm not seeing any traction here. I'm not seeing massive amounts of devolution following off the back of this.
I think, I mean, it was interesting. They all kind of lined up and then signed this giant bit of paper, and then, you know, everyone had a nice photo taken. So it's a nice thought, but, you know, Chris Glenn from Federation of Small Businesses, I'll come to you. You know, is that kind of sign any use to, say, your members, you know, the city leader signing a bit of paper?
Well, it's more symbolic than anything, I think. As you say, it's not really going to make any bit of difference, isn't signing that bit of paper. But you always have to remember the original Magna Carta was signed by the King, and then it wasn't actually signed. So it was done with his seal.
Oh, signed by a king, but not signed by a king. I'm not sure their Magna Carta could really live up to that one.
Maybe King John was just too posh to sign. Maybe that was kind of the thing, and it wasn't enacted anyway. The Magna Carta. It was a bit of a get out of jail free card, the original one. So maybe this is the same.
I mean, one of the things they're doing now is you can sign the Magna Carta yourself if you go online. It's not quite how it was 800 years ago. Chris Rowell, Conservative Future. Do you think anyone will get involved with that at all?
I'm not actually sure, Louise. You know, the original Magna Carta was a huge thing for our democracy and representation. You know, that is where our not necessarily where our culture of liberty comes from, but it's certainly where limited government and power to the people started. And there we saw the people, or with the barons, demanding from the king more rights for individuals and less for the centralised state. And what we're seeing here is government figures demanding more power for themselves. It's quite cynical, really.
Oh, quite cynical. Very nice. I mean, I did get a trip to Glasgow and I did get an invitation to a free minibar by my hotel.
Excellent.
I declined, but, you know, I'm sure some of the city leaders indulged at some point. Well, representing the Leeds City region in Glasgow is Keith Wakefield. He's the leader of Leeds City Council. He's been calling for devolution in our region for quite some time, with the support and backing of other West Yorkshire Council leaders. But is it all it's cracked up to be, and what does it actually mean for the people of West Yorkshire? I spoke to him in Glasgow after he'd finished a photo shoot advertising the Magna Carta.
Well, we're using the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta to launch yet another campaign for devolution. And what we're arguing is that if the government gives us the freedoms and resources, we can actually rebalance the economy of this country. Big cities matter in creating jobs, wealth, apprenticeships, houses. And so we're all got together to give support to each other to make sure we can keep the momentum up for devolution. And, you know, the evidence is overwhelming. Cities like Leeds, for instance, were reported last week as being the fastest growing job creator in the country. Imagine with those resources given to us, those freedoms, we could do so much more.
Do you think they're listening down in London? Do you think this event up here in Glasgow will have any resonance around, 400 miles away?
Well, we have got Danny Alexander. I think they are aware that in places like Yorkshire in particular, there's strong popular support from the people of Yorkshire for this. As we all know, we're heading towards an election. Elections matter. And I think the time has come. I don't think we should go back to being ruled by Parliament in the way that we have been doing, because it doesn't work. Parliament and Whitehall haven't proved to be successful for cities of the north. It's time people in Yorkshire took over a bit more responsibility, resources and power to grow their own economy.
I think some of the responses we had this morning, and I certainly had on my Twitter feed, for example, were saying, but do we really need more power? Do we need, more? I think people feel like, some people out there feel like there's going to be more bureaucracy within this. Is that the case?
No, it's not about another parliament. It's not about another assembly. It's actually using the existing governance we've got, local councillors in Yorkshire taking on a bit more responsibility, so no extra layers. And in fact, you should put it where it's effective. And already we've proved that we can create jobs at 7,000 per head compared to national of 28,000 per head. We can actually reduce young unemployment, 16 to 18, which we have done, 74% success rate compared to nationally 30%. So there's plenty of evidence in recent reports, plenty of evidence in the jobs we created that we actually could do a lot better than Whitehall.
There's quite a lot of Labour councils signing this pledge. Is it politically motivated? Is it because we've got a coalition government? Is this just the Labour Party finding a new way to have a go at the Conservatives?
No, it's not always been partisan. In fact, we've had a number of Conservative leaders in core cities over the year. And if you talk to any Conservative leader, most of them want devolution because they feel that that's the future way. Scotland have proven that there's real hunger and appetite for it. So has Wales, Northern Ireland, and I think England is the last place in the United Kingdom that hasn't got a devolution package. And we've been waiting, as everybody knows. We were promised November, we were promised December, we were promised in January. We're still waiting for the government to show us the hand, and we need to get on with it.
That's Keith Wakefield there, the Leeds City Council leader. Keith saying that this is not about party politics. Anyone believe him?
No,
not at all. Lots of shaking heads here. We are just around the corner from an election. Chris Rowell, how much of a part is that playing, do you think?
I think that the Conservatives and the other parties do differ on this. We've backed English votes for English laws, so where English MPs would have a casting vote on English only issues, whereas the other parties are looking at regional devolution. Certainly Labour and the Lib Dems are. There's a clear dividing line there, and I think it's quite worrying to break down the rest of the United Kingdom when we've seen what happened in Scotland and how angry people got around the referendum.
But it did get people out to vote, didn't it? I mean, that's one thing. Chris Glenn, just having a look at that idea that there wouldn't be any more, say, local bureaucracy, it wouldn't add to the pile. Do you agree with that?
Well, the thing is that we do have new local, well, not democracy, but we do have local institutions that have been set up specifically for this. There's no real democracy involved when we've got the West Yorkshire County Council was brought back, including York, but now it's not elected. It used to be elected. It's not anymore.
That's the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Yeah, which is... call it a different name, but it's the same thing really. We've got the LEP, which once again there is no democracy involved with that either. We don't think either of them are particularly working very well, and the problem we've had with these institutions is that they've been rushed through. There's been no consultation around them. The business community weren't involved in the setting up of the LEP. It's supposed to be business led. They've set up their economic plans without consulting the business community, and you just think, well, you know, we're left constantly trying to firefight the problems that are caused by rushing into these things, and we're just concerned that we're going through the same process, that we're rushing through for these powers when we don't really have the institutions in place to actually deal with them at the moment, and it just seems to be about powers for the sake of powers.
I think, because one of the issues is elected mayors. We'll probably get onto that in a little bit. But in terms of, like you say, these groups like the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, council leaders from across our region are on it, but we haven't asked them to be on it. Vic, is this replicated, do you think, in other areas?
It's very tricky at the moment to see exactly how devolution plans are going to work out region by region, because at the moment, where it's kind of that terrible kind of business term of blue sky thinking. There is no framework for this. There is no particular template that will be used in every area.
Sorry,
and
I'm telling you the truth, what I see.
Where you might find that different regions have different solutions for this problem, which doesn't seem terribly effective, to be honest with you. If we're going to have a solution, as Chris has rightly said, you need to involve people in it, you need to talk to them about it, and it needs to be done on an actually effective basis rather than being done on a piecemeal basis.
Well, taking a look at what's happening in another part of our region today, Huddersfield University, they have a bit of a day of devolution for their students. They've had Jason McCartney there, Barry Shearman there, we'll talk to them in a bit. Well, it's got my boss, Len Tingle there, everyone, sharing a debate. And joining us from there is our reporter, Peg Alexander. Good afternoon to you, Peg.
Hi, Lou, that's right. I'm over in Huddersfield this afternoon because there is this event taking place today. It's called Decentralisation and the Future of Yorkshire. It's billed as an event that brings together politicians, business leaders, representatives of regionalist parties, academics and local organisations to discuss prospects for decentralisation measures. One of the organisers is Dr Andy Mycock. He's a reader in politics here at Huddersfield University and he's with me. Hi, Andy.
Good afternoon.
So tell us a little bit more about this event. What were you trying to achieve by bringing all these people together today?
To put it simply, to begin a conversation. There's a lot of debate in Westminster and within town halls across Yorkshire about this idea of decentralisation, but it tends to be very much a politician-to-politician narrative, and it's not really bringing in other voices. And so what we try to do is to bring in different groups that are interested in these issues, and they've got ideas about how to take this forward. And so in many ways, it's the beginning of a conversation which I suspect over the next decade is going to become increasingly important to people in Yorkshire.
Because it does feel like there is going to be some sort of devolution. It's a question of what that devolution is, isn't it? Now, today at the event, a report was produced by the all-party parliamentary group of MPs from across Yorkshire. What have they said then in that report, Andy?
Well, in some ways it's quite tentative. They're saying that there is a need to decentralise some responsibility for things such as transport and for skills, for designing more economic prosperity, and particularly for education. So there is some sense in which they're arguing that there needs to be a shift of responsibility and power from Westminster. I think that there is a problem in that Westminster turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and so you've got London-based, in many ways, MPs looking at issues of Yorkshire with one eye on their own role in the political system. So if you can compare to what the report has said, the manifesto said today, to what's been powers being given to Scotland say, this is pretty tentative stuff. And I suspect that what we're going to see after the general election in 2015 is more political focus on greater powers being devolved. The big question is, though, what are those powers? What are they going to be? And there's a debate about whether it should be Yorkshire-wide, there should be some kind of Yorkshire Parliament, or whether we should focus on the cities of Yorkshire, the city regions of Yorkshire, and particularly on Leeds and on York and Sheffield. And in that sense, the politicians don't seem to be able to come to much agreement on the structure of what's going to happen.
That's right, because there hasn't been any definite proposals that people have been putting forward today, has there?
Well, no, and I think that shows, what an early stage debates about decentralisation in Yorkshire are at. That, these are very tentative. It's remarkable in a way, considering that, we've been talking about the English question or English questions for over a decade. The political parties are so underdeveloped in their thinking. In many ways, they are reacting to what happened in Scotland. But it's clear that there are different parts of the north, particularly, that are going at different speeds, so Manchester and Leeds.
Of course, Manchester already agreed to have an election.
Well, the golden child of George Osborne's Northern Powerhouse. It's a very different conversation to what's happening in these, developed metropolitan places than in the more rural parts of Yorkshire. And it's odd that, there hasn't been any real joined-up thinking about how to connect these city regions to the wider county of Yorkshire. And I think in some ways that's what our event today is to try and get that conversation going.
Well, Lou, later on this during the show, we're going to be talking to some students to find out what they are thinking about this whole issue, find out whether they're excited by it, whether they care about it or not.
Thanks very much, Peg. So that's Peg at Huddersfield Uni today. Can I just say more things about turkeys in Westminster? I think if we have more of that coming up to the election, it may be more fun.
Excellent soundbite. It was magnificently crafted. I loved that. I might steal it.
Just in terms of some of the issues that devolution could bring up, because our city leaders say it can boost the economy, we're going to get more jobs, we're going to get better transport, we're going to get more skills. Why is Westminster letting go of stuff going to be better for us?
It entirely depends upon what they let go of and in what framework. The idea behind centralising power in the first place was that it was actually a lot easier and a lot cheaper to make decisions if you did them centrally. The problem with that is that you don't actually know a great deal about the regions. You don't know what they need, what is required, what are basically the nuts and bolts of the issue if you're 200 miles away. So we're not entirely sure. They keep saying that there's going to be more money. I don't know where that money's going to be coming from. Is it going to be released from a different budget?
Those turkeys.
Exactly. Is it going to be released from a different budget? Is it going to be money that we've already got but that's earmarked for something different? It keeps this piecemeal promise that there's going to be more money, but we're not really sure where it's costed from. And I don't entirely know that having more kind of extended local council, which is what Councillor Wakefield was talking about, is actually going to be all that much more effective, really. There is an argument that they were very inefficient when they were last in charge of lots of big departments. So actually, is it going to be more efficient this time around? I'm not so convinced.
Well, the government's representative of the event was the Liberal Democrat, Danny Alexander, who's the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He gave a speech to delegates at the Devolution Summit in Glasgow and told me beforehand that he would be in favour of more powers to regions and maybe they should give a bit of a consideration to elected mayors. Could we get our own Boris? Now, I spoke to him just before he addressed the summit.
Well, I want to see much more devolution to cities. We've made some big progress in this government. The city deals with the announcements we've made on new powers for cities, on transport, on skills and so on. Places like Greater Manchester, Sheffield leading the way. The Glasgow City deal too has been a big change, but I think there's a lot more that we can do. In particular, I want to see cities come forward as they are with the Charter today and talking about fiscal devolution. After all, here in Scotland, we're handing over big new tax powers to the Scottish Parliament. I think that cities should be taking more control of their own finances, as well as looking for powers from government. That creates a real economic incentive. So I hope that cities, for example, might want to take more control over their business rates as a way of raising money, but also of giving a real incentive to grow local economies.
At the Leeds City region, they're still waiting for their deal. I spoke to the leader this morning. They've been waiting December, January, still not got a deal. And they were told they couldn't involve fiscal devolution. Is that where the Lib Dems would differ, say, to the Conservatives?
Yeah, I mean, in this coalition we've made a huge progress, despite it being a coalition between a party that's very enthusiastic about devolution in the Lib Dems and a party that's been much more cautious about it in the Conservatives. We would go a lot further in terms of fiscal devolution, but I would urge Leeds not to take those ideas off the table. I hope that, on things like business rates, for example, we could make progress, and certainly within the government for the last few months of this coalition and in the next Parliament, we'll be pushing to hand over real financial levers to cities as well as the city deals we've done so far.
Your leader, Nick Clegg, has been in Leeds many a time over the last 6 months telling us about this One North and the big conversations. Things like transport, are they still key to your plans when it comes to, the northern regions?
Well, we've been investing, I lead this within the government, huge amounts in improving our transport infrastructure, the largest programme of rail investment since Victorian times, the biggest programme of roads investment since the 1970s. That's crucially important to making sure that the economy of the north of England is a real engine of growth for the whole country, and that's why we're taking forward further ideas with Transport for the North, for example, a body coming together to really coordinate and lead transport developments. And it's also why in places like Sheffield and Manchester, and I hope Leeds too, control over transport has been one of the big asks in these processes.
Just finally from me, in terms of elected mayors, we've seen the Chancellor pushing West Yorkshire quite hard to take on an elected mayor. Would you agree with that strategy? Do you think they're necessary for regional devolution?
I think that improved governance and improved accountability is a very, very important part of these city deals, of taking forward these sorts of arrangements. I don't think it needs to be a mayor, to be honest. I think there are other ways to try and find that sort of accountability. But if places want to take forward a mayor, that's fine with me. I think that the important thing is improving governance and improving accountability, not for us from central government to dictate particular ways of doing that.
So that's Danny Alexander there, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and as I've just been telling my panel, a giant man. Extremely tall and broad. I had to do, I'm quite sure, and I had to do the whole craning neck thing as I asked him a question. Now, he didn't write off elected mayors. He said, well, there are other ways, but if you want them, I quite like them. Chris, what do you think an elected mayor could bring? Do you think we need an elected mayor, a Boris-style figure?
Well, the thing is that if you look at London, Boris has done quite well around London, but you have to consider is that everybody talks about the positive aspects. We could end up with a Ken, and we've got to consider that aspect to it as well. We might not get a good one, and that's always a concern. If you've got somebody with a lot of power, as in one individual, it's how they use that power that's an issue. And at the end of the day, the people have already spoken once and said that they don't want one. So I think it would be a folly to force one on the region as they've forced some of these other institutions on us.
I think the idea of an elected mayor is interesting because Manchester said no, didn't they? And now Manchester look like they're going to get one. You'd be pretty irritated if you lived in Manchester and voted no and that got passed, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I personally, we've had this discussion before on the agenda. I'm not a great lover of the idea of mayors. I think that it's a kind of piecemeal approach to devolution. If you're going to devolve properly and do it in a far more comprehensive way. I don't like this. Well, you can do a bit of transport and maybe you can go out and stand on the back of a London bus at the Beijing Olympics. It all seems a little bit small scale to me, unless it is going to be a big international city like London. And as much as I love Leeds, I'm not going to claim that we are a massive international city in the same way that London is. I'm not entirely convinced about the argument for mayors generally.
I mean, the mayor one's a really interesting one. I lived in a city which got an elected mayor and there was no referendum. It was just, here's your mayor. And we went, all right, he's here now. He was the leader of the council. It's not really changed anything as far as we could tell. So why, Chris, what do you think about elected mayors? Do we really need them?
I think it's worked differently in different places. I have no idea about the situation in Manchester, actually, but contrast sort of Boris, who's been rather popular among a lot of people.
Yeah.
Ken was a character as well. People know what the Mayor of London's for, whereas look at the elected Mayor of Doncaster. That's just basically an elected council leader, isn't it?
Yeah, which is pretty similar to what's gone on in Liverpool. If you want to get in touch today, you can tweet at BBC Leeds. You can get in touch and tell us your views on devolution, your ideas. We've had some tweets already today, thank you very much. Martin Roberts on Twitter: devolution needs to include cities, towns, villages, dales, coastlines, moors and countrysides, not just the city regions. It's exactly what Jim Murphy was saying at the start of the programme. It's really interesting. We've also had other tweets totally agree that maybe this is interesting, Gary Verity for Prime Minister of Yorkshire. We've gone way beyond elected mayors now, so if you want to get in touch you can do. You can text 81333, start your message with the word Leeds, or you can tweet us as well at BBC Leeds.
On the agenda with Louise Martin.
BBC Radio Leeds.
So you're listening to On the Agenda, and this is a Devolution special. Did you ever think the day would come? We're looking at issues brought up earlier this week as the biggest cities in the UK met in Glasgow to talk devolution. So we're speaking about that today. We're listening to some of those leaders. I've got a wonderful panel in front of me, and we're also at Huddersfield University because there some of our West Yorkshire MPs have been explaining what they would like to see for the region. Yorkshire politicians have launched a Devolution for Prosperity document. They come in all shapes and sizes, these documents, don't they? The language is incredible. They're calling for a plan for the region. So MPs Jason McCartney and Barry Shearman have been at Huddersfield Uni. Our reporter Peg Alexander has been speaking to them, and she had a bit of a chat with Barry first.
Well, we've said, look, we've got this powerhouse in Scotland, in the north of us. We've got a powerhouse down in London, to the south of us. And it's about time we shared some of that devolved power so that we made decisions here in Yorkshire. We don't have anywhere in Yorkshire where we've got a vision. What's a vision for our region? Yeah, what's the strategy to achieve on the vision? How do we get really fantastic transport across the region and across the north? How do we get super skills and education in the north? How do we make sure that businesses grow in the north? You know, we haven't got that focus. They've got it south, they've got it north. We want it here in Yorkshire and across the north.
So are you putting forward any particular proposals for what the structure should be?
Well, no, we're consulting on it. One of the things that came out of this conference this morning, a lot of people are talking really around the thing that I've been campaigning for a long time. That was a Yorkshire Commission. There's more of a view today from many people, one of our main speakers, for a consultative commission, a commission on the north, you know, constitutional commission on the north. Where are we going? Let's get people involved. At the moment, a lot of people don't just want another layer of government, but they want involvement. What I've been saying today is that there are all sorts of different ways for people now to get active in the communities, through crowdfunding, through social enterprise, through doing things themselves. And I think most people don't realise here today that there's a social and political change coming, that they're so close to it they can't see it. So let's get there, let's get ahead of the curve, and let's do something great for Yorkshire.
So that's the Huddersfield MP, Barry Shearman there. And the Conservative MP for the Colne Valley, that's Jason McCartney, says we need to bang our own drum more here in Yorkshire.
When I go down to London, I see an amazing city with lots of investment, lots of building going on. Crossrail is coming on, lots of glass skyscrapers. I know who the Mayor of London is, Boris Johnson, and I see him banging the drum for London and inward investment all the way around the world. And I want some of that for Yorkshire, where we live. The government is already giving lots of extra money to our area, our region, through the Leeds City Region Local Enterprise Partnership, and we recently had the £1 billion local growth deal, and we're seeing investment in our railway stations, the Trans-Pennine route, the M62 has been widened with the managed motorway scheme.
Do you worry they were a bit anonymous, that people don't necessarily know who is on the Local Enterprise Partnership?
The Local Enterprise Partnership, the Leeds City Region under the leadership of Roger Marsh, is really starting to bang the drum and make a difference. We're here at Huddersfield University. They've got £2.9 million for a new incubation centre at Globe Mill in Slowett in my constituency, and they're starting to distribute funds to local companies to employ people and create quality apprenticeships for young people. But we need more of that. We need strong leadership. Boris is a strong leader for London. Everyone knows who he is, and he does the right thing for London. If we could get that in Yorkshire, I would back that. Someone like Gary Verity, who did such a great job for the Tour de France, would be a great figure to bang the drum for Yorkshire, get inward investment, and where we live and work a much better place.
So you said a great figure there, someone to bang the drum. You haven't said the words mayor.
Well, it would be a sort of mayoral figure, and there would have to be some kind of electoral democratic accountability. If you ask people, do you want a mayor for Yorkshire, they might and ah. If you then float a few names of inspirational leadership in our area, they may speak about it differently.
That's Jason McCartney there, the MP for the Colne Valley. So he says someone who's got mayoral aspects, and there could be some electoral elements to it, but he won't say elected mayors. So that's how touchy we are on this subject. I think it's really interesting. There's another vote for Gary Verity to become Prime Minister or something of Yorkshire. So, love for Gary Verity muchly today, apparently. But just in terms of what Jason was saying there, do we not bang our drum enough? I mean, Chris, you work with businesses across our region. Is there an issue that we're being a bit too coy and a bit too quiet about how good we are?
I think that we do bang the drum. I think the problem is that we don't get everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, and I think there's a little bit of division out there amongst sort of the political aspects and things like that. And I think that it's not necessarily that we need a single voice for it, but perhaps one single channel. And at the moment, I think there's too much division out there and too much fighting amongst different parties and things to get the common message out. That ultimately we all tend to come down to a very similar vein, but they're just not working together, and I think that's quite a problem. There are too many divisive figures out there, I think.
I think it's interesting because one of the things that we've spoken about in the past around devolution is this idea of competition between the likes of Bradford and Leeds and Wakefield and Huddersfield, and that we're not teaming up. I didn't include Halifax, but I love you. So is that the problem? Are we not being joined up enough? Are we not being friendly?
I think there's too much, as you say, you've got the competition between places out there, but I think at the same time that there's not a common theme for them to go for is the thing. And I think that we have had this thing of us against them and everything else, and it's not got down that path of us all being one voice going forward, because there is too much division out there with different things.
I suppose I'd like to touch on the idea of Gary Verity for a second.
Okay, why not? Someone wants him as Prime Minister.
Well, people have been bringing that up, and he's been a fantastic figure, bringing in the Tour de France to Yorkshire and leading that. He's doing that already without being nationalised. So why do we need to make him a sort of a government figure? There are great people promoting Yorkshire all the time, and they're doing it because they love the area and because it serves their business or it serves their town and things like that.
Do we need to politicise happiness for a region, I suppose? I mean, that's what you're saying, isn't it?
It's an odd idea about elected mayors, because it is a kind of two-handed job, because on the one hand you have all of the legislative kind of elements that go with it, transport policy, all of those kind of ideas, and then you have the idea of somebody as a figurehead, as some kind of marketing tool to be able to bring business into a region. And I think that those two things have been put together for some of the elected mayors, like Boris, like the London mayor. But actually, you're absolutely right, you could pull the two parts apart. There is no real requirement for us to have an elected person to go and bang the drum for Yorkshire. That can be done in other ways, and it can be done very effectively in other ways, as we've seen with the Tour de France. But then there is this legislative side, and if we the question is, do we want one person doing the legislative side, or do we actually want what is the equivalent of a kind of expanded local council or an expanded county council doing that? The people of Yorkshire have said no, they don't really want one person doing that. So actually, it would be a little bit difficult if we come back to Manchester for us then to suddenly be told, well, actually, you're going to have it whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some more tweets on this, and this is quite fun. We're talking about elected mayors, and do we need our own Boris? Mark on Twitter says, how much will that cost?
Absolutely.
I expect quite a lot of money. Are we talking the millions for, voting and all manner of stuff?
Think about elections, the actual kind of mechanics of getting a campaign
They'd need
sorted.
Some assistance.
Exactly. They need an office, a car, etc., etc.
Tea fund.
Exactly. That could run into the millions alone.
Tea could cost them a fortune. And we've also heard from Leeds Citizen on Twitter. Hello there. Core City's online petition signed so far by 72 people out of the 19 million they claim to represent. Let's move on. Strong words there from Leeds Citizen. Completely see what you're saying. If you want to get in touch today, you can. It is at BBC Leeds on Twitter. You can join us, or you can text us 81333. Just start your message with the word Leeds. Now, one of the biggest elements of this devolution summit was a report released by a think tank called Res Publica. They say more power should be given to local authorities, but those powers should come with more accountability and have public accounts committees within them. That sounds like more money, Mark off of Twitter. But do people really want more layers and levels of government? Will it turn people off the idea if they don't understand who's looking after what? I put that question to the Chief Exec of Res Publica. That's Philip Blond.
Res Publica have been commissioned by Core Cities to write a report on how to advance devolution beyond the kind of bespoke individual deals. And we've written a report called Restoring Britain's City-States, Devolution, Public Service Reform and Local Economic Growth. And in that we argue that there should be new institutions to deliver devolution to all of Britain's cities. We call for the creation of a devolution agency. We call for the creation of local public accounts committees to manage the devolved expenditure. And we call on government to adopt our timetable, to adopt a presumption for devolution. We also call for the ability of these devolved city regions to have tax raising powers and to actually be able to integrate public services across their city regions. We call for a retention of income tax. We also call for a pilot so we can see how varying income tax could work and also varying corporation tax could work within city regions. We have a duty to collaborate, which we think should apply to anybody who has any public expenditure in a city region at all, and we want to bring them all together to enable cities to actually make the state work for the first time.
Do you think that local residents, for example, Yorkshire residents, where I'm based, do you think that there's necessarily the appetite for local public accounts committees, more levels of, I suppose, local government? Do you think people want that?
Well, I think people want something that works, and people are sick of seeing their places ignored and being gradually strangled economically or culturally. So I think if you say to people, this is the outcome we're going for, we want a world in which your kids can live locally and get good jobs and have careers without having to move to London. We want a world where you can shape the look and feel of your place, where things won't fall apart and you can make a difference. People would vote for that. And what I'd say is we're not creating a new tier of government. We're creating, from existing government, a new form of government that will work properly. And I think people will support that, because the regional assemblies didn't work because they weren't connected to place. This is very much connected to place and connected to improving the jobs and society and culture in those places, and I think people will support that.
I think it's interesting you mentioned this idea of place, because it's identity for people, isn't it? And they feel very strongly about their local areas. Do you think the government and Westminster understands that enough?
I don't think they do, to be honest. Most people think that local people, that people really don't give a damn about what's closest to them and will only vote on the big matters. Actually, I think the reverse is true. I think people really care about what matters to them locally. It's just in Britain, because we've centralised so much, we don't have an efficient or an effective form of local government. And in a way, that's what we're trying to recreate. So the title of our report is Restoring Britain's City-States, the great 19th century states that built the wonderful buildings in Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, Leeds. You know, we want to get back to that, but obviously do it in a modern way and create a modern future for the people who live there and for their children and for their children's children.
You're able to take a step back, I suppose, compared to some of our city leaders that are here. In the work that you've done, do you think there is an appetite within government to actually devolve more powers, or do you think this is, you know, a bit of a pushing at a closed door by city leaders?
I think it's an open door, but it's a door that needs to be pushed from the bottom up, or from the inside, if I can put it like that. At the moment, what we have from government is partial, it's individual, it's not a rolling programme. No government, no party has yet really fully committed to the level of devolution that's required. Only the Labour Party have come up with a figure, but even that is dwarfed by, for instance, rolling out the Devo Max deal to all the other core cities. So I think all of them need pushing to go further, and we need people to ask for it.
Do you think there could be any change after the May elections?
Well, I think at the moment every result looks fairly likely, doesn't it? So I think everything's to play for, and I think the idea of a popular power for the places that people live could be part of the offer that gets somebody into number 10 Downing Street.
That's Philip Blonde there from Res Publica. You're listening to BBC Radio Leeds. This is On the Agenda. We're talking Devo. Philip Blonde there is saying it's this idea of identity and creating a Yorkshire that we feel is very close-knitted and involved. Do you think, from people that maybe you've spoken to, that, or yourselves, you know, do you think people want devolution? Do you think they want more powers? At the end of the day, do you think they want more independence for their region?
I think if they did, they would put it out for a referendum. And the reason they haven't put it out for a referendum, I think, is because people don't want it. All they can see is that it's going to give the potential for more bureaucracy, particularly around the region. The big thing is that it will end up with tax-raising powers, so they'll end up paying more tax for living around here. And ultimately, when they talk about more money for the region, it's not necessarily more money, it's just money coming in from a different route, and perhaps we're deciding slightly differently how to spend it. But we don't really believe that we're going to get millions and billions of extra money into the region, because ultimately all they're doing is shifting it from somewhere else, not a different region, it's just somewhere else that it would have been spent in Yorkshire. They're just giving it a different way of spending it. But ultimately it will end up with tax-raising powers. And I don't think that the people want that, and I think that's the reason why they're not having the proper conversations out there, there's not the proper consultation, and why they won't put it out to a referendum.
It's a very interesting idea about identity. I'm from Yorkshire. I don't need a regional assembly to make me feel any more Yorkshire. I'm fine. If you break me in half, please don't. But if you do, there's a white rose running all the way through it. And I think a lot of people feel like that in Yorkshire. I can't speak for other regions in the country. I don't know. But I think it's an odd idea that somehow we need an additional political platform in order to make us feel more kinship in Yorkshire. I don't see that at all. That seems like a slightly artificial argument to me.
I agree.
Yorkshire's done pretty well for the past 1,000 years without it. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was said on, was said on Monday at there was an Ipsos Mori poll which said that 79% of people trusted local councils to make decisions on their behalf, whereas only 11% of people trusted central government. Why do we think that is? Because that's, to me, says people want devolution.
I think that's the bigger problem, though. I'm not inherently a believer in the idea that local councillors are any more or less morally driven in the decisions that they make than national government. But we have such a low opinion of national government at the moment that people are looking for alternative places to put their faith, and local councillors look like a better deal. If we went and asked that question 40 years ago, the answer would have been very different, because people had more of an experience of regional government. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily that people want devolution because they inherently think that local councillors are closer to the issues and more trustworthy. I think it's actually that it's coming from the other end of the spectrum, that we think that national government is completely out of touch and that they're not responding to any of the things that we want to do. So it's more of a push factor from national government rather than a pull factor from local.
I mean, we've had some more tweets in. The Yorkshire Guardian. Devolution can have a real impact on people's lives, economy and environment, plus democracy. Johnny Appleseed, good afternoon to you. We should have a parliament of our own, much like the Scottish and the Welsh versions. He wants a Holyrood. Well, shall we have it? Halifax.
Did you know the first Viking parliament on British soil was actually held in Tingley near Morley?
So we're all off to Morley, which is nice because it's not far.
We could go York, second city of, long regard, so we could do York maybe.
I mean, we've got loads of options. Alistair Calder, Alistair Calder McGregor, who I know is a Liberal Democrat candidate for the general election. I'll just throw that in first. We've got all things in context. Good afternoon to you, Alistair. With a population and economy equal to Scotland, we should have a political devolution with a parliament in York.
There you go.
There you go.
The thing is, if we're going to do this, because we're talking about different degrees of this, if we're going to have devolution, Devo Max as it's kind of used, okay, but that's going to cost a lot of money, it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of planning. What we're actually talking about to some degree is a more piecemeal kind of version of that, which costs less money, it takes less time, but also has less outcome to it, it has less positive outcomes to it. And I think that that's kind of where we need to centre the debate. If we want devolution, okay, but what kind of devolution do you want? Because that's a tricky question.
Devo Max, my boyfriend thought that was a sort of battery when I was talking about it the other night on the phone. Is that a battery? Is that one of your special work things? No, it's not, but I'm really glad you're involved in politics right now. He's not at all, which is probably a good thing. We've been talking about Huddersfield University today because their students have been talking about devolution. They've had a big day there, lots of politicians turning up and business types as well as Len Tingle, Yorkshire's political editor, there chairing a debate. And as well as there is our reporter Peg Alexander. She's been talking to some of the students. Hi, Peg.
Hi, Louise. That's right. I'm here actually with two politics students going to tell me what they're thinking about the discussion so far and generally about devolution. So I've got Richard with me. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
And I've got David with me. Hi, David.
Hi.
Now, you two are obviously not your average student in that you are politics students. So my guess is you're both really interested in politics.
I'd say that's true.
Yeah, I think you'd have to be to study it.
Yeah.
So given that then, Do you think generally students and young people really care about devolution? Is it something anyone's ever kind of come up to you in a bar and said, let's talk Devo?
No. No, not young people. Go on.
Only my friends who know I'm interested in it. There is really an apathy towards politics amongst young people, and devolution is so under the radar, certainly in West Yorkshire, maybe not so much over the Pennines in Manchester, but in West Yorkshire that it's not on the tongues of people's, they're not talking about it.
Mm-hmm. What do your friends talk to you about, Richard, then, when you're talking politics? Do they mention devolution or inspired by Scotland and what's happened there?
Well, they don't speak so much about Scotland, but we spoke a lot about the Scottish referendum, and the Scottish referendum really galvanised a lot of young people to get involved in politics. Like, you had 14, 15-year-olds really getting engaged, and then you had 16-year-olds even voting on it, so... Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you think that did have an effect actually in galvanising them to talk about some of the issues? Well, we've been waiting here. We've just had a really interesting discussion actually about, we weren't talking about things like should there be an elected mayor or should the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have power. You've been talking about some really radical ideas, haven't you, for different ways that governments around the place run things. So we were trying to pull together a list of really different ideas. So they could be everything from a purely federal UK, where obviously decisions are made at
each
smaller
country.
level, and then they go up to, so Parliament becomes representative of the other areas, like Germany. You were saying, Richard, that's how it works in Germany.
That's right.
Yeah, and then you were telling us as well, David, about the Canary Islands and what they do there.
Yeah, I think it's every 2 years they move the president from Tenerife to Gran Canaria. And with that, they also moved the political institution from that island to the other island. They don't engage all the islands because there's quite a few, like La Gomera, which is particularly small. But it helps provide a connect between the people and the power of that autonomous region in Spain.
Mm-hmm. So that's one idea. So you could have something that moved from, say, Halifax to Tingley or to York, to follow up what you were talking about in the studio there. Then we got even more radical, didn't we? Because then, David, what was the next suggestion that you said could be considered?
Well, I think people in South Yorkshire would have a real issue if the centre of power in Yorkshire was based in York, because the people in Sheffield, Rotherham, Barnsley, those areas, they typically ascribe themselves to a different politics than, say, those of North Yorkshire. So instead of having one political centre, you could put, say, like a Yorkshire Department for Health in one town, a Yorkshire DWP in another, and then the actual Chamber of Parliament, say the Yorkshire House of Commons, you could do it electronically.
So not even have a chamber?
No, so then people can be voted for, but there isn't a centre of power, so it keeps it spread across Yorkshire.
You can say, Richard?
Well, that would take the sting out of like a lot of regional rivalries, like, South Yorkshire not wanting to be ruled by York,
Yeah, so some really different ideas then, because the next question I wanted to ask you was, listening to the debate today and listening to the debate generally about devolution, do you think there's enough discussion of different ideas, or are people concentrating too much on should power be in Westminster or with the city regions or with existing local authorities?
I think with the history of the UK being so centralised, that this debate is really in its infancy, and obviously it's been generated mostly by the Scottish independence referendum, and the 1998 debate is better than no debate. The problem is they're not talking so much about democracy, they're talking more about economics.
Economics, yeah. I don't see that as a problem personally. I think if there is going to be devolution, it has to have a major kind of economic element. It has to involve, devolution of tax powers, and it has to be focused on how to make areas more prosperous.
So my one last question then to you, because I think we generally accepted that for a lot of young people, a lot of students, devolution doesn't feel that sexy. What do you think needs to happen to try and engage more younger people in the discussion, do you think?
Richard? Wow.
Any thoughts or ideas?
Well, if you were to have a referendum, then, or a series of referendums, then that would galvanise young people's interest, I think.
I think you could go for something a lot more radical and try and create a grassroots movement. I mean, one of the things discussed today was Constitutional Convention of Yorkshire, but like Richard said before we've gone on air, that's quite an elitist approach, and the only way you're going to really galvanise support is if you actually get people out there on the street campaigning on behalf of something they're passionate about.
Well, there you go, Louise. Our students here haven't let us down, our students from Huddersfield University, because, as we would expect, we've come up with some really radical thoughts and ideas today.
Thank you very much, Peg. Constitutional discussions, definitely not sexing it up, I would say, not making it interesting for anyone. But, it's interesting what they're saying, that actually maybe we need to change the language, change the tone around it. Maybe we do need a referendum and it'll get everyone talking about it. Do we need to go that far?
There is an argument that referendums do encourage debate, although...
Hence the referendum in Scotland.
Exactly, but for example, my views on Europe and that if there were to be a referendum, that perhaps they wouldn't end up with a particularly deep debate, and I fear the same would happen with devolution. We might end up where the debate that is generated off a referendum is not necessarily all that interesting, all that encapsulating. If we think about the referendum that we had for, changing the first past the post system, it wasn't exactly a sexy or galvanising debate.
Oh no, that was a struggle for anyone though, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
you were never going to make that
really
hot.
No, exactly, and I think that devolution, I have some sympathy with the idea that it has to be based upon economics, because realistically, if there isn't an economic argument for it, we're going to struggle to push the idea generally. So,
Chris, could your members give an economic argument for or against devolution? Would that help, do you think?
Well, I think the thing is that for us to do that, we've got to ensure that there is some economic benefits there for it. And at the moment, we've seen the history of what they've done through the LEP and the Combined Authority so far, and we just think that that it's not there at the moment. We wouldn't trust them for it. All we can see is that they're looking for the power. It's not about the economy. They just want the power. And all we can see is them raising additional taxes for it, because that's all they just seem to want to do.
And Chris, from a Conservative Future point of view, is this going to be something that, do you think, I'm not going to ask you for your party's policies, I hope that you memorise them or anything, but do you think this is going to carry on past the election regardless of who gets into power in Westminster?
Yeah, I think this debate will continue. My take on it is we're not lowering taxes for people, and we have been lowering taxes for people. We're not doing that at a national level, just to have them reimposed by a Yorkshire Parliament.
Well, it's going to carry on and on, isn't it? This isn't going to be the end of the devolution chat come May, is it?
No, it's absolutely not, because, we were talking off air about whether or not, if there is going to be, different solutions after the next general election. If the SNP go into coalition with Labour, which is a strong possibility, that could have knock-on effects for devolved assemblies generally, because there might be an issue of money going north of the border as opposed to perhaps going into some other projects, perhaps. The push from Scotland has galvanised lots of different regions to think more effectively about what they want to do, and that isn't going to go away, but it is going to be influenced by what is happening in those different regions, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, as to how successfully we feel we can follow even a little bit of what they've set out.
Well, I would like to thank my guests very much. Thank you for making an hour on devolution pretty exciting, everyone.